forward. I'd like to hand this conversation over to Jacob to provide more of a fuller introduction to what he does, and then also then to Christopher before they begin their session. So without further ado, our presenters today.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
So our plan for today, we have a presentation. It will not take the full time. Hopefully we'll have a lot of questions, because when Nicholas asked us to do this, he said people had a lot of questions, and we can go through this and give you a bunch of basic information, but we want to make sure we actually answer the questions. So please be prepared with your questions at the end. I am let me here. Oops. I am staying off my camera today because I had a few crashes this morning, and both happened while the camera was on. So I'm hoping I can avoid it by keeping the camera off. My name is Jacob Borowski, Jake Borowski. I work for BLM headquarters. Where BLM headquarters is a good question. Where BLM headquarters is a good question. I work out of Santa Fe, and I'm the Cadastral Services Fiduciary Trust Manager, which means I'm the person in BLM in the cadastral program who is in charge of coordination with BIA and with any kind of Indian land issues that come up on a national level. And I also run the BILS program, the BLM Indian Land Survey program. Chris and I are going to split up our talk today. And Chris is going to start is going to do the first section. Chris, do you want to share your screen for that part and introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'll probably wait to share my screen because I don't know how that's going to go. I've been having the same computer issues that you have, and just Chris issues this morning with a bunch of other things going on. So I am Christopher McDonald. I am currently the PLS dataset manager for Headquarters 350. At one point, I was the BLM Indian Land Surveyor, BILS for Southern Plains. I recognize a lot of the names on the list, and I'm very happy that you guys are here. And Jake, I don't know about you, but I will not be able to see the chat through there. And if you guys have questions and can get them out pretty quick, it does help the presentation go. If you do ask them when we stop for a minute, the conversations go to me a lot better on that one. And I think it does for you the same. Is that correct, Jake?
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan, Chris. I can try to keep track of the chat while you're talking. Maybe you can while I'm talking.
Okay, because when I think I'm going to share my screen here in a minute, I am going to lose the chat and everything else. So here we go. Go share, and I'm going to try to start presentation from the beginning.
We see your email right now, Chris. There you go.
Perfect. So, hello, everyone. Cadastral surveys and how they work. We're going to cover a whole lot of different things in there. And there we go. So we've already kind of introduced ourselves. Here's our contact information. And Jacob kind of hit on it a little bit. I am with Headquarters, but I also work out of my house in Arizona. And I guess at some time I'm going to either have to report to Salt Lake City or maybe DC or somewhere like that. So the ground rules for this, Nicholas pretty much covered them. You know, we don't like to interrupt other people and don't monopolize time. But we do like to have the questions throughout the presentation because it helps us, it helps the conversation, and it helps other people, you know, to hear the thought processes and things is going on it. And, you know, we're going to talk in general terms because every land action, every tribe, every BIA office, every BILS, every surveyor is different. and unique. And you've got to be able to understand that as we go along, and you talk to the surveyors and the situations that you have. So our objectives, we're going to kind of define what a survey is, identify different types of surveyors, kind of give a little bit of what a surveyor is and does, the different types of survey authorities, list of reasons for getting a survey done, understanding the difference in the types of surveys and what they're used for, other cadastral services that could help you out in dealing with some of your land issues or rights issues. What does a cadastral survey entail? And this is kind of going to cover both, mainly federal, but it's going to talk about a little bit of private, because all these interactions should happen at both levels. And you'll see that as we go through there. And what are some of the challenges of getting a cadastral survey done? And we're going to talk heavily more about the cadastral survey because as a request on that one, but we can talk and we'll talk to the private side of it. So what is a survey, and is there a difference between a private survey and a federal authority survey? Yes. A survey. This is going to kind of confirm the boundary lines and legal descriptions and make sure that they match, because what is on the legal description doesn't always match what is on the ground and how it interacts. It also determines restrictions and easements that are included in that property. They may not show up in your legal descriptions. And one of the things that you have to do when you buy a piece of property or take it in a trust or any of that is do a title report on that, because an easement may not show up in your legal description. It may be recorded in another document that you don't know about. And you have no idea that they have an easement for a power line or water line across your property, and it doesn't show up. So that's a very good reason, knowing all the rights and entitlements to your property, and in doing that research, a surveyor will find that. So, and we've talked about this, determining the boundaries and the rights associated with it, because you may not have all the rights that you think you get when you buy the property, And one of the other things is topographic of the property. Is it flat? Is there buildings on it, improvements? How do they fall within the lines? And other issues that could come up. Is that fence on the line, next to the line, across the line? Where does the building fall? Does it fall within the building envelope? So, any questions on that? So, private surveys. State authority, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we do have a question. The question is from Andrea Hall. It says, when you have a discrepancy of legal description in survey, how do you get owners to agree?
Good luck on that one. So one of the things that the surveyor will do is when they pull the documents, and Jacob's going to cover this a little bit more, is first in time, first in right. Which property was sold first, how it was broken up, all that comes into play on the legal descriptions and how a surveyor surveys it. So they're going to have to do all that research to understand how that issue came up. Did it come up in drawing up the legal descriptions? Did it come up on who put the fence up? All of that. So there are a lot of different factors in that, and a good surveyor will get to the bottom of that. And, I hate to say it, but sometimes they do have to end up in court. Sometimes you can do a boundary line agreement or a quick claim deed to take care of some of those issues.
But going to court's the last resort.
Yes.
90% of the time, we can find solutions with the help of your surveyor or with BLM before it gets to that point.
Right. And adverse possession does come up, and I always think of it as the pink elephant with the purple dots on it. It's very hard to prove and get adverse possession taken care of. You have to have the court actions on it, and people don't realize there are steps to those, and all of those steps have to be met to take care of it. So, and we'll get to the next question here in a few minutes. So, private surveyors work under their state authority, their state stamp. And they have to take classes, they have to meet all of those, and they should be doing it to their state requirements and minimum standards. So federal authority surveys, does a federal surveyor have to be licensed? Not always. BLM works under the Secretary of Interior, and it's passed down through the director to the cadastral chief, and the cadastral chief who signs it. That doesn't mean they're less qualified. They have to be state licensed or a degree in surveying and so much experience to get that designation.
And Chris, there are exceptions, but in most states, the qualifications to get a state license are less than the qualifications to become a federal surveyor.
Correct. So a federal authority survey is an official decision because you are signing for the director, and it says that right on the plat. Field notes, all that description of the work done in the field is common between both private and federal surveys. Federal authority surveys or BLM surveys tendency have a plat and a set of field notes that go along with them, and they work hand in hand, where a private survey mainly puts all of their information on the plat and doesn't usually have the two different documents. So that's one of the big differences there. So, and all of them are going to be doing the same thing. They're going to do the research, observe, making the measurements, looking at all the different aspects of the legal description, the boundary lines for that tract of land. So I do see a question in the chat about, can there be adverse possession against the federal lands? Public domain, there cannot be adverse possession on it. There are very, 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 I can't put enough varies in there, few instances that anyone could actually adverse possess against the government. When that can happen is when land comes into federal ownership. And that's one of the things that we are talking about here and trying to reaffirm is the importance of a survey and doing your due diligence, whether it's other cadastral services like an SBE product, which is a legal description review, chain of surveys, and all of that, to make sure that doesn't happen, because that could happen when it's coming in. But adverse possession is a very different animal, and it's my pink elephant with purple polka dots. Everybody talks about them, but very few times do you actually see one.
Hey, Chris, can I butt in for a second?
Please.
That question. So the question of adverse possession, as Chris said, the usual answer is no. There are a couple of very rare exceptions, but when land is acquired by the federal government, whether it be trust land or restricted fee land or not other non-Indian federal land, the adverse possession can happen before the federal acquisition and not be found until after the federal acquisition, if that makes sense. So, adverse possession falls under state law, and every state has a time frame that the adverse possession has to be proved in. So, a common time frame is 7 years. So when there's a 7-year statute of limitations, that means that the land has to be occupied and used for 7 consecutive years. And if the 7 consecutive years happened before federal acquisition, then people can claim adverse possession against the federal government. But once it comes into federal ownership, that stops the clock, and there's no other opportunities to claim for adverse possession.
Right, and it has to be continual. You cannot have a break in time in that 7 years, and you have to go through court on it. And just because someone puts up the fence doesn't mean that automatically happens. So you can't steal land, private or public domain land, by just putting up the fence and saying that's where the boundary is, because there is the whole process of the adverse possession. It's not just not putting the fence up. It's I can't remember all the different steps, but yeah, I talked to your surveyor or Bills about that one. So
yeah, the details will vary state to state.
Correct. Yeah, good point, Jacob. So types of surveys, types of land surveys, they'll depend on why you need them and how they're going to be done. Whether it's just, simply locating the property lines, splitting the parcel of land up, if you're buying the land or selling the land, all of these are going to come into play, and you're going to have to talk to them. And as a lot of you who know me will tell you, you need to sit down and have a good conversation with your surveyor on exactly what you're doing and why are you doing it to get the best product for your needs for your transaction. There are topographic surveys that say you want to build a house or whatever it is. You got to make sure the drainage is correct, the slope of the land. You don't want all the water draining into your front room or anything like that. And that goes along with the construction survey of it, is, how you want the house laid out, laying out the house, making sure it fits within the setbacks, it's not over a water line or anything like that. And that kind of goes along with the site plan for a survey. Another type of survey is when you divide property up into different lots, and that's called a subdivisions survey. And it's kind of like the PLS system, the public land survey system, with all the township sections and ranges. All the sections are kind of little subdivision of that bigger parcel of the township. So that's when you get the lots and blocks in there. And then you have the boundary survey, where they're trying to match the legal description to what's on the ground. And I'm going to hit this again, including all the rights, entitlements that go with that property or may not go with that property. And a subset of that is the ALTA survey, which goes into a little more in depth of buying a piece of property and getting the title insurance on that. And that's where you have the checklist of all the different things, all the easements have got to be shown, all the encumbrance. And that's kind of the closest, other than a CFED survey, that you will get to kind of a cadastral survey. And I always recommend that you look at those and make sure that you have the conversation of what exactly this boundary survey is going to encompass. And then we have the cadastral survey, the federal authority surveys. And, that is the higher degree of survey, because we are acting for the United States government and the people within that to protect everyone's rights as a surveyor on where that boundary is. And that's one of the big misconceptions of a surveyor is you may be hiring us to do a land survey of your property, but we're also surveying any property that is contiguous or touching that piece of property. So we could be surveying at least 5 or more boundaries every time we do one survey. We've got to know how everything matches up, how they all interrelate, make sure they all, come and start from the same position and hit all on the same corners, because sometimes there are laps and gaps, and we have to take care of that. So any questions, Jake? So what is a surveyor? Professional land surveyor, true, trained, different combinations of things. One of the most important is the law and understanding how things work. And that is probably one of the most misconceptions that is out there, because, just about anybody can measure or do the math, but understanding the laws that help put that boundary in place are very important. Engineering, the physical work of establishing the boundary lines are important. So we use specialized equipment, GPS, total stations, professional land surveyors, private side, they do take several tests. Most of them I take 3 tests. The 2 NCEES tests, and I forget what that stands for. Jacob will correct me here in a second on that one. And then their state Pacific test.
Yeah, NCEES is the, oh, wow, I'm drawing a blank, Chris. National, well, yeah, I'm drawing a blank. It's the national, I don't know what the C is for. Well, I mean, it's the national organization that runs the tests for surveyors and engineers.
Right. And they're very rigorous tests. The first one's 6 hours. The second one is 4 hours. And then your state one is, depending on the state, can be anywhere from 2 hours to, I think some of them are 6 to 8 hours. So, and different types of surveyors. So I have John Q. Public down here because, just about any time I talk to anybody, they have a story. Well, I helped my uncle out, or I helped my friend out as summer, intern doing a land surveyor, and hey, I can help you find your boundary lines, or I can help you hold the tape and pull over, 133 feet to find your pin or set a pin. So those really don't have any standing. In one of the ones that was kind of mentioned earlier, length of barbed wire, you go buy a barbed wire roll. How long is it? It's 1,320 feet. Wow, that's the north line of the northwest quarter of the northwest quarter, right? 1,320 feet. It may not be the actual breakdown, but that comes pretty close, and fences do get built because of that. Then you have your state licensed surveyor. So they're the ones that go out, do all their work, take the tests. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier, and I'm going to mention here, is there are time frames for this. Certain states have a certain requirement of on-the-job training. I think Arizona is 4 years. Some states are 6 years before you can even set for the tests. So you have to have a lot of background in that one. Then you have to pass the test. Then you have to do some more time in on-the-job training, and then pass the other 2 tests. And we've touched on this one just a little bit. Is a state licensed surveyor using a CFEDS endorsement? Just because you hire a state licensed surveyor that is a CFEDS may not mean you are getting a CFEDS survey. And this goes back to what I talked about earlier, is what are you having the surveyor do for you? What is the task that you want them to do? Do you need to have that CFEDS endorsement or not? So they could be just doing a normal state licensed surveyor for you, and they shouldn't be having their CFED's endorsement on it? Or are you having something that you want to bring into trust, or you need that extra work in there to meet the requirements of a federal authority surveyor? So we're talking the monuments, the research, the true mean bearing, and other requirements for a fee to trust action. So I need to make a big difference here is, are you hiring a surveyor for just a regular survey, or are you hiring him for doing the CFED's work and using his CFED's endorsement? And that's going to come with a heftier price, because there is a lot more work that goes into detail on that. They should be doing a more diligent job in their research on that. Does that make sense? So I want to stop right here. Any questions on that?
We have a whole bunch of questions that backed up here, Chris. Last time you asked, I was on mute. I thought you were just ignoring me.
Oh, so I do usually try to ignore you, Jake, but that's okay.
Did you want to pause and answer some questions now?
Let's hit the last two. So we do have, and then we'll get all those. So we have government surveyors that may work for other agencies that could be doing different boundary surveys or different surveys for ditches and other things. And then we have the BLM surveyors, the cadastral chiefs, and the BLM Indian land surveyors, the bills that work under their federal authorities. So, all right, I'm ready for some questions, Jake.
Okay, the first one looks like it's Klamath tribes in Oregon. We are a restored tribe without a reservation. We have checkerboard-owned land, parcels, and trusts. Several private property landowners are blocking access to our treaty rights areas and our tribal cemeteries, even though there is an alleged right of way. I can take that. It's hard to answer that question without knowing about what you should do without knowing the details. My suggestion would be to get in touch with your bills, and you're in the Northwest region. So that would be Michael Swanson. Do you have anything to add to that, Chris?
No, I think you covered that. It is getting a hold of your bills in that area and the cadastral chief and working with them and BIA to get that resolved.
Because BIA and BLM share responsibilities for things like that. So that's really what the bills is for, is to bridge those two agencies.
Yeah. And if you need to reach out to Jake, I just volunteered Jake to do extra work. He can help you, point you in the right direction on that one.
Okay, and then we have, we are currently dealing with the issue of where the survey completed by BLM does not match the survey completed by the Pueblo's hired survey team. We have asked for a meeting to discuss the discrepancies, but to date have not been able to clear this up. Sounds like this question is probably coming from New Mexico. If it's referencing a Pueblo, although there are a few Pueblos in other states. So I'll take a stab at this first, Chris, and then let you follow up. In general, when there's a when a private survey and a BLM survey come to different conclusions, the BLM survey has the upper hand. When the courts look at conflicts like that, since the BLM survey, even though the Secretary of Interior never even saw that survey, the BLM survey represents the opinion of the Secretary of Interior. So that's a big hurdle to get over. In general, the courts will side with BLM, even if there's a difference of opinion, and even if they think the local surveyor's opinion is better, as long as the words they use is fraud or gross negligence on BLM's part. When you have two private surveyors disagreeing, a judge can pick which opinion he likes better and go with that. They can't really do that with a BLM survey. as far as clearing it up, that's something that would have to be worked through the chief cadastral surveyor for the state you're in. If you're in New Mexico, that would be Michael Purdy, and that will be the first, either the bills or the chief would be the first person to talk to and make sure something's set up to come to figure out what's going on there. If you have any trouble getting through to them, you can always contact me. We can start looking at some of the details there. You have anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, just, it's communication is a big thing, and a surveyor should always, whether it's federal or private, be talking to everybody, be talking to, when they find another surveyor that butts up against it, they ought to have that record, or they ought to talk to the landowners. They ought to be talking to BIA, getting the TAMS report, getting all that information to it. But yeah, that's kind of a pickle. And like Jake says, reach out to the cadastral chief, and if not, bring into Jacob on that one, since that's his realm.
Yeah, and just when I said that BLM surveys generally will stand against a private survey, that doesn't mean BLM never makes mistakes. If a surveyor brings up something that we missed or finds a mistake we made, often we can end up changing the survey if we made a legitimate mistake. We need to consider not just the government's rights and the Indian property owners' rights, but we also have to consider the public's rights and private landowners' rights. But we usually do a good job, so we usually stand by our surveys. The next question is, what type of assistance is provided to tribal nations to learn surveying techniques? That's one of the reasons the bills are there, to help with training of BIA and tribal members. So if you have concerns, if you want a training session, the bills is the first person to talk to. We lose you, Chris? Oh, he seems to be gone. I'll go on with these questions. Hopefully he comes back. What do we have next year? Sorry, I lost my place here. Okay, is there such a thing as federal land title search? Where do we go to get one? State title companies go to County Recorder of Deeds and Secretary of State Registry. For Indian land, there's a TAMS report. If you're talking about land held in trust or restricted fee, and you go to BIA to get that. For other federal land, there really isn't any kind of system like that, because federal land ownership is usually a lot simpler than private land ownership. Most of it is public domain, which means it's always been federal, so there hasn't been a lot of transactions on it. Yeah, if you're talking about Indian land, you would go to your local BIA. Oh, you're back, Chris. Great. Yeah, if you're talking about Indian land, you would go to BIA. If you have questions about other federal land, the status of it, you would go to BLM. And again, your bills could get you in touch with the right person. Are you back, Chris?
I think I am.
Oh, there you are. Good. Okay. Still going through these questions. Let's see. We got when BLM does a survey on tribal lands, does it give notice so tribe can participate or comment on survey? The short answer is yes. They should. If you feel like something's going on and you haven't been contacted, get in touch with your bills right away, and they can put you in touch with the people who are doing the survey. And then
you may not be able to change the answer, but you can influence how the answer is made, because you may have information that help lead the surveyor to a different answer. It is a professional opinion, and you just can't go up and say, hey, this is how I want it, or this is how it should be. But you could lead the surveyor to information that will lead him down a different path, or the correct path to finding the information out. You may have a record or a survey or knowledge of how that fence corner got there, or how things have changed, which could influence the outcome of that survey. So, man, communication is huge on this one. You should always be contacted by the surveyor and the bills.
And the other reason it's important to be in contact, even if BLM's surveying adjacent lands with a share boundary with the land you're interested in, is there might, if you have sensitive areas, you have concerns about access or artifacts, you want to make sure the surveyors who are going to be on the ground are aware of that. And sometimes tribes even want to have one of the tribal members or tribal employees accompanying the survey crew whenever they're on Indian land. And that's all. Those are all reasonable requests, and should be respected by your local BLM office.
And even that on private surveyors, because we're out there to do the same thing, and we're not just surveying that one property, we're surveying all the adjacent properties. So, because you never know where that little golden nugget will be, or you'll find it to help find you the corner or find you the information.
And then we got, how will bills work change with BIA's National Policy Memorandum, modernizing the land description review process for fee to trust acquisitions and the GIS strike team? That's a good question. I can't really fully answer that yet, because we haven't seen how it's going to work in practice. It eliminates the requirements for land description reviews by the bills, but the bills are still there for BIA and the tribes to consult with. I think the short answer on that is that's a wait and see. Why don't we go on a little, Chris? Because so we can get through our material, and then we'll stop again for questions soon.
Okay, and I kind of think we've already covered this a little bit. So the difference, survey authorities is the no authority survey, is John Q. Public, the roll of barbed wire, going out there and measuring it, or and I'm going to throw this in there because there are a lot of good surveyors out there and a lot of poor surveyors out there. And then there's a lot of companies that will say, hey, I will go out and put your deed on the ground for $250 and go out there and stake the measurements of your deed on the property. And they're not doing a survey. They've just took your money and, gave you false information, and they need to be turned in the board. I hate that. I hate when surveyors don't do their job. State authority surveyors, they are working under their stamp. A subset of that is ALTA, so they are going a step further with further requirements with the ALTA. Then the state authority, which we talked about earlier, where they're using their CFED's endorsement, so they're getting closer to a federal authority surveys than other surveyors out there. And then the federal authority surveyor done by the BLM state office, or the bills working with them on that one. And I throw the bills in there because they are your contact person or your gateway to make sure that you're having the good conversation with cadastral and using the communication and the same wording and understanding of what you need to get done with that survey, and if it's meeting all those requirements. And then federal authority surveys, supplemental plats, and administrative surveys, which Jacob is going to talk about here in a little bit. Jacob, I think there's a question for you in here. Cadastral survey against a mineral or a administrative survey for BLM.
Okay, let me read that. Can you please explain the difference between an official cadastral survey and an administrative survey? I'll be getting to that shortly, so I'll be covering that. From what I've told, the administrative survey lacks field notes. Aside from that, are there any other differences? Thank you for that as well. Okay. Yeah, I'll when my portion of the presentation, I'll get to that. And if I don't answer your question, let me know, and I'll make sure to get that answered.
And then are you going to talk about if there is a dispute between BLM and a survey, the process?
Are you going back up to, is there a dispute? If there is a dispute between DOI, BLM, and the tribe, is there formal? Yeah, I'll cover that too.
Okay, yeah. Do we have all the questions answered? I think, yes.
There's another comment here. The BLM survey is off the markers, which may cost the Pueblo several feet in land in various locations. That is our concern, is that whoever did the BLM's fieldwork did not properly locate corner markers. So we want to ensure it's corrected prior to approval of the BLM survey. Yeah, you do want to make sure if there's a mistake that's corrected before it's filed. That's something the state office chief cadastral surveyors have the authority to make boundary decisions, and so that's who you need to talk to with your concerns. And again, if you can't get through to them for some reason, we at headquarters are here to help.
And Jacob's going to cover that process here in just a few minutes. So, why do we need a survey? I think we've kind of already covered most of these. You know, reference of legal description may not be your boundary lines. You know, there could be issues going on there. Hiring a surveyor will meet certain requirements for real estate approval or title insurance or any of that. You know, knowing where your property lines are and all the rights with them is extremely important. You know, and understanding there could be restrictions and easements that go across your property that you may not know of. You know, because I've been in cases where there's been a water line that you can't build across, so the property is useless, or there's an overhead power line coming through that you didn't know about. There are a lot of issues that can come up in a survey with the proper research. I'm going to emphasize that proper research will clue you in on that and have you the full picture of all your rights and entitlements to that property. Well, and I think we've kind of covered most of these: finding your property line, mortgage requirements, getting title insurance, boundary disputes, trying to get those. Latent ambiguities, you know, somebody been using your property for a long time, or other entitlements that going across their easements. You need to know where those are. Building a house or other structures, making sure it falls within the building envelope, locating improvements, locating utilities. What is a certificate of survey? Some states don't call them plats, correct, Jake? They call them certificates of survey.
Yeah, I've seen that term in a few states. Other states, it might be called a record of survey. It's usually, and I can't speak for every state here, so I may be way off base with your question, but usually what it is it's just a boundary survey by a licensed state surveyor.
And we've already touched on a lot of these reasons for getting a survey, because sometimes that legal description is old, or getting the markers or corners updated so you can find them, so everybody's put on notice where they're at. Updating the information, and your new survey should show all that. If they do find some old easements or other problems, it will reflect that, and it will be recorded in the public record or in the BIA office. Jacob.
Oh, that's me.
We caught up on questions. Yeah, I think so.
I think we are. Yeah, I'll get to the administrative survey. Okay. I will. Will you keep an eye on the questions while I go?
Yes.
Just trying to start my slideshow here.
I mean, I can go ahead and just give me the beep and I'll go to the next slide.
Oh, I've got it up here. I just make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Bear with me just a second. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? On the wrong side. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. So I just wanted to start with why is BLM even involved? Isn't BA supposed to be the agency that deals with Indian land? And the reason is this act of April 8th, 1864, when it was passed, it didn't say BLM, it said GLO. But other than that, it's been the same since 1864. Whenever it becomes necessary to survey any Indian or other reservations or any lands, the same shall be surveyed under the direction and control of the BLM. I cut it off here, but it goes on to say, as far as possible in the same manner as the public lands are surveyed. So that means all the rules that we've developed for public land surveys apply to Indian land also. It's a mixed bag, because for some things, it's you have to, wait for BLM to be available to get a survey. But the benefit is you have the strength of BLM behind any of your surveys. And that's, a BLM survey being an official government decision is a powerful thing. You can be fairly assured that someone who has a difference of opinion can't come along and say, no, the boundary is actually over here. It's a very powerful thing to have. And before I get into the details of a cadastral survey, we can help in Indian land without going through the full expense and time of a full official survey. Chris touched on SBE products, standards of boundary evidence, like LDRs, chains of surveys. Usually we think of that as something BIA requests, but the tribes can request them too. Individual Indian landowners can request them too, as long as there's a federal interest, which means if it's held in trust by the federal government, if it's restricted fee, or even if there's a future federal interest. If you're planning to bring something into trust, BLM can still be involved on the basis of that future federal interest. Other things we can do short of a full official survey is a supplemental plat. We'll talk more in detail about that in a minute, and administrative surveys, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And one of the most important things is advice and consultation. We have the bills, and that's what they're there for. And we also have the chief cadastral surveyors and their staff who are available to, they're not going to drop everything and spend days on your project for free. But if you have a question, they're there and available to answer that. The system we have now arose from the fiduciary trust model that began in 1994. And this set up the BLM Indian Land Surveyors system we have. And it's also where the portion of the departmental manual that involves Indian land boundary evidence came from, which is the 303 DM7. DM stands for Departmental Manual. And that's where the LDRs and COSs and all the standards of boundary evidence came from. And that's where how we fill them out is prescribed from. And that departmental manual was created with consultation with tribes, and BLM and BIA working together. It was a DOI-wide effort. Most of you are probably familiar with the BLM Indian Land Surveyor program, call them BILS. But just in case I want to describe it, what it did is it set up 12 BILS, BLM Indian Land Surveyors, and located one in each of the 12 BIA regions. They all report to a state office chief cadastral surveyor, and they're BLM employees. So each state office, BLM state office, has either somewhere between 0 and 3 BILS reporting to them. And then there's one cadastral services fiduciary trust manager, which is me at the headquarters level. So the 303 DM7, the part of that that's used most often is the land description reviews. Prior to just a few weeks ago, they were actually required for FIDA trust. But the 303 DM7, it applies to FIDA trust, and almost any other realty transaction can be accompanied with standards of boundary evidence from 303 DM7. And what they are is an assessment of risk to the government and the tribes. The government, before it takes something into trust or allows some use of government land, wants to make sure that we're not putting taxpayers on the hook for litigation, enforcing boundaries that are questionable. And it's the 303 DM. It's a thorough look through the legal principles of boundaries and the technical principles of land surveying. It's not a quick matter. It requires agreement by the state office chief cadastral surveyor before it's finalized. So there's a second check. The BILS or the land surveyor or the CFEDs who is doing the SBE are all very experienced surveyors. The BILS are senior surveyors who most of them have been around BLM for many, many years before they become a BILS. And the chief cadastral surveyors, of course, are similar. And the other people who can do these are the CFEDs who've gone through who have a state license and have gone through a fairly rigorous training program that was created by BLM and passed a test that was created by BLM. So a CFED's, while not the guarantee of a good survey, is it certainly gives more reason to trust than a random surveyor off the street. So the LDR it's a risk assessment. What we're looking at are these are the 5 main things we look at. Is the description unambiguous? We can get into details where on the face of it, the words can mean more than one thing. The classic example of that is a half of an adequate part. I won't go into the details, but there's at least 2 ways that could be interpreted, and depending on the section you're in, the differences could be fairly substantial. And then we want to know, is the location locatable or relocatable. That is, if we take this description, put it on the ground in the same place that either the previous surveyor put it, or will all surveyors agree on where we put it if it hasn't been surveyed before? And that goes into number 3, is will future surveys agree on the location? And the other thing we want to know is, will the courts agree with the location? We have a survey and it's not based on sound legal principles. A neighbor can take the tribe or BIA to court and they'll win. We don't want to be in that situation. And then the 5th thing is there unwritten rights. And that goes back to things like adverse possession or unwritten agreements. You can even get down to the weeds. And, you can even have unwritten conveyance in some cases. And so the LDR results in one of these 3 decisions on the screen here. The land description is acceptable as written. The land description has potential problems as noted below. However, the risk appears minor and the conveyance activity should not be affected. And that word risk is important. The idea is not to review to make sure everything is technically correct and perfect. It's a review to see, if the government takes this on and if the tribe purchases this, are we getting ourselves into a boundary dispute that's going to end up costing more than the property itself? And the last box is, serious problems, which is a recommendation by BLM to whoever requested the LDR. It could be BIA, it could be a tribe, it could be another government agency, whether the risk is too big to go ahead with the transaction without fixing the issue. And usually we can offer solutions to that risk. We don't want to just tell you can't do it and leave you hanging. We want to help you find solutions. Looks like we got some questions here.
Yes. CFED surveyors who still work with the bills. Yes, we do have CFEDs that still work with the bills and the cadastral chief. I don't think anything has really changed on that portion of it. Can CFEDs do cadastral surveys under special instructions? Yes, under certain circumstances. They have to be written for them. There has to be cause. There has to be funding, and Jacob will kind of cover that in a little bit. I don't think we can kind of go over the new LDR requirements, but one of my big concerns is always people get hung up on legal description review. Here's my legal description, review it. There is a lot more information that go along with that. It's just not that legal description, like we said earlier. It's how it interreacts with all the other adjacent or contiguous properties and other latent ambiguities that could come up in that. So, it's just not looking at that legal description. It's looking at the title reports, the adjacent properties or contiguous properties, and doing the research to find out that or anything else affects that property. And that's one of the big misconceptions of the LDR review process. It's just not of that legal description. It's all the land tenure that goes along with that legal description, which is huge.
Well said, Chris. And then we have a question. Can you share the new LDR COS requirements? So the only thing that's changed, the LDR, the requirements to do an LDR have not changed. The only thing that's changed is the BIA handbook that previously required LDRs for fee to trust applications no longer requires an LDR. They require an internal BIA review, which would be much shorter and much less in-depth process. I still recommend LDRs because they they will identify issues that are going to be much easier and cheaper to deal with before it comes into trust than after. But they're no longer being required by BIA.
And one of the things that I always say in my presentations, man, you really, anytime you want to buy a piece of property, you need to have all this research done, because the price may be X and all these things are laying there waiting to be found out later on, and you're stuck with a bad piece of property, when a good survey or good research will find all these out and you can get them fixed prior to buying it. You can drop that price down or decide not to buy it because of all these issues, or having the SBE process done.
Yeah, right. And the LDR process isn't unique to BIA, the Indian land. When BLM or any Department of Interior or the Forest Service is going to acquire land, they go through a almost identical process. So it isn't just Indian land that goes through this. And if in many states, if you get a mortgage in your private property, a very similar thing happens. It's done by a private surveyor, of course, but the banks require similar assurance.
Right, and that goes back to the ALTA, land title insurance.
Mm-hmm. It looks like we've got a question about the land buyback program. It's still ongoing. I think it's not going to be called a land buyback, but the latest federal budget had more money for buying back tracts, and that's BLM's part in land buyback was fairly limited. We did help with the mapping, but that would be a question to direct towards BIA.
And I think they call it the land consolidation now.
Right, exactly. There's a comment: value. Good point. Be careful what you pray for. More than one tribe wanted ancestral lands and got a brownfield. Does BLM ever do environmental studies as part of a survey? Not as part of the cadastral process. For Indian lands, BIA does do an environmental check before they bring it into trust. And for BLM land, BLM would do environmental check. There's a form called the CIP. It's actually part of 303 DM72 that includes the environmental check. It's not usually done by a surveyor, and for Indian land, it wouldn't be done by BLM, but BIA has environmental specialists who should be doing that.
Right, but the 303 DM7 does recommend the CIP done by done by a surveyor, or at least having a surveyor involved in it. And back to the environmental part of it, a surveyor should be out there on the ground walking around, so they may see those issues out there. And that goes back to having a good conversation and a good relationship with your surveyor is, hey, there are some funny looking blue barrels out there that are 55 gallons, and these weird plants are growing out of them, and all the chickens have 3 legs. That may be something to be concerned about, because they are going to be actually out there walking the ground and have that conversation with them.
Right. Yeah. The CIP is a multidiscipline effort.
Yes.
It's concerned with occupation and things like environmental contamination. And each there should be an expert from each field involved to make sure everything's going well. I'll move on now. I don't like to read from PowerPoints, but I think this is a great description of the 303 DMs, the departmental manual boundary standards of what they are. And we often get questions about why it takes so long, and why do we need so many documents? We already have a title insurance. Why do we need all this? So I'm just going to quickly read this. The standards require both boundary and title evidence to be examined in totality for conflict-free land boundaries. Boundary evidence is examined to identify insufficient land descriptions, ambiguous boundary location, conflicts in use, unauthorized encroachments, boundary gaps or overlaps, and other conflicts along the boundary line. Relying solely on title evidence and title insurance creates the potential for overlooking boundary defects. Break in here for a minute. If you have a title insurance policy, if you look closely, they almost all of them exclude issues that can be found by a land survey. Boundary evidence involves the compilation, examination, and analysis of title documents and boundary documents combined with the physical inspection of the boundary. The focus of boundary evidence is the on-the-ground location of boundaries. The standards help to close the gap caused by a singular focus upon title evidence. Combining title evidence and boundary evidence creates stability for the benefit of the trust beneficiaries and the government. Yeah, that's, I couldn't say it better myself, so I just decided to read that section.
And that's very important. There are some key issues in there, and especially with the title insurance, they tell you right on your policy, if it can be found in a survey, we are not covering it. So man, you couldn't ask for more highlight, bold statement in there, you know?
Right. What title insurance does is it insures the title, but it doesn't insure what you own title to.
Yep.
That's why a surveyor's research is important here. Okay, so the other thing short of an official survey that we can do is supplemental plats. And supplemental plats, carry the full weight of the Secretary of the Interior, just like an official survey. It's an official government decision, and the records are kept just like an official survey, but it doesn't involve a field survey. And no changes are made in the ground. So there's no new monuments no monuments are restored. And the reason someone might want this is it's much less expensive, but it only works in some very limited circumstances. And that would be, to simplify descriptions, if you provide an official area, so if you have an allocate part that's not, it doesn't have an area on the plat, we can do an official survey, a supplemental plat to give an official area to that. We can also do a supplemental plat if we have a very reliable administrative survey or even a local surveyor's work to incorporate into the official record. They can be used to subdivide allocate parts or government lots that are on an official survey but don't have a line drawn between them. So the supplemental plat would just be would just create a new line in the ground between 2 points that have already been surveyed. So it can give a new parcel surveyed status under the law without actually spending the time and money required for a survey. They are very useful when they can be used, but their usefulness is limited to certain situations. Now, Gloria, I'll get to your question. An administrative survey, what is it? Well, what is it not? It's not an official decision. Some of them look just like an official survey. This one I have on here doesn't. It looks different, and I like that because it puts people on notice that, hey, this isn't an official survey. But the way they look will vary from state to state and from era to era. What they do is they represent the opinion of whoever signed it. An official survey represents the opinion of the government, the Secretary of Interior. An administrative survey is only as good as the person's opinion who signed it. They can be done by BLM or surveys done by other agencies. BIA doesn't really do them anymore, but in the past they did. Almost any other survey by any government agency besides BLM has the status of an administrative survey. Why would anyone want this? Well, you save some money and time. It doesn't necessarily have to go through the review process, doesn't have to be filed. And another reason they're commonly done is we have a strange request that doesn't require an official survey, and the request isn't quite in conformance with the BLM survey manual. This is a vehicle we can give a client a product they want at slightly lower cost without worrying about the requirements of the manual. Another reason is, if another agency is interested in surveying land and BLM just has too long of a wait, or they can do the survey themselves. So the drawbacks of an administrative survey, to answer your questions, Gloria, is it doesn't give the parcels surveyed the status of surveyed land. One place where that can come into play is the law requires any public domain, which is any land that's never been private, that went straight through treaties or other forms of acquisition straight to the federal government, and never went out to patent. The law requires that land to be officially surveyed before a patent is issued, before it's disposed of by the government. It also gives much less protection for the boundaries. What I spoke about earlier, the assumption that a BLM survey is correct unless there's error, gross error or fraud, doesn't hold for administrative surveys, because it's just as good as the opinion of the person who signed it. Let me know if I didn't answer your questions with this, Gloria.
Jacob,
so,
we have another question.
Sure.
Can tribes take BLM surveys to a title company, a survey to buy title insurance? And I'm going to say no, because normally they have to meet ALTA standards. So that's Land Title, or American Land Title Association. And the survey may make that, but it's not going to have the documentation how they are going to want to see it. I think the surveys are going to be performed equal or comparable to that, but they're not going to be displayed how they want them. Does that make sense, Jake? And can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not quite sure about the answer to that question.
Because I mean, they're going to be looking for Schedule A and Schedule B, and they're not going to be listed out on a cadastral survey like you would an ALTA survey.
Right, but title companies will issue title insurance. I've never seen someone get a BLM survey for the purpose of title insurance, but I've seen title insurance policies that were done on previous surveys. That would probably have to be a question for the tribal insurance company, the title insurance company, whether they'd be willing to do that or not. That's a good question. I don't know the answer though. I suspect that Chris is right and that you might run into some resistance.
All right, we got 40 minutes left, Jacob.
Okay, sorry. Right. So another point I want to make here is BLM, often through the bills or the chief cadastral surveyor or other staff on other cadastral staff at the BLM office, or me or Chris, or even the headquarters chief cadastral surveyor, who is Chris and I's boss. We're here to serve the public in general, and we have a special responsibility to Indian land. I mean, we have our trust responsibility that we take seriously. So we're always available for advice and consultation. Don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so now I wanted to get into what exactly is a cadastral survey. People are often shocked at the price and the time frame that's needed to get through them, and I kind of wanted to give a description about why that is. So we broke it down into 10 stages here. Establish a need, the request, tribal consultation, instructions and assignments, executing the survey, review of the survey, acceptance of the survey, public notice, survey filing, and then finally the PLSS, the Public Land Survey System data set. And SMA is the Surface Management Agency data set is updated. So we're going to quickly go through these stages. So the first stage is to establish a need. And if you think you need a survey, especially if you think you need a cadastral survey, an official survey, talk to BLM. Maybe they have a cheaper, quicker option. It could be a case where a private survey would do just fine. It could be handled through an SBE. It could be, it could be just something easily cleared up with just a few minutes of looking at the records by a surveyor. So if you think you need a survey, talk to BLM. And maybe you don't, and if you do, we'll start you on the right road. My little picture here is a situation where you probably do need a survey. This is in my local area, and this is the county GIS, where they map the parcel boundaries just based on what is actually in the deeds. This parcel over here is actually part of a reservation. So there's this gap here. Who owns that gap? This may be a situation where a cadastral survey is actually necessary, or a surveyor could just look at those descriptions and say, oh, the GIS people made a mistake. There's no actual gap. So when you see a problem, don't jump to the conclusion immediately that a survey is required. And there may be other options.
So, Jake, does a tribe have to go through BIA to request a cadastral survey?
No, they don't. A tribe can go directly to BIA as long as the land is in trust or restricted fee, or they're planning to bring it into trust. They can go straight to BLM. The drawback with that, though, is that then the tribe's on the hook to pay for it.
We're caught up on questions.
You said we're caught up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So stage 2 is the actual request. Some of the requests aren't really requests. Congress tells us to survey it. It's more of a command, or the court tells us to survey it, or by executive order, the Secretary of Interior or the President can tell us to survey something, and we have to just do it. The other surveys have to be accompanied by a request. This is a key part of the chain to make an official survey, is we have to have an official request. So a federal agency can request it, BIA or any federal agency, even the post office or something. The tribe can request it, or even an individual tribal member can request it. The hitch there is that the request has to include funding. BLM does not fund their cadastral surveyors' salaries. They find a very small part of it, which covers training and some miscellaneous work for BLM itself. All our other surveys have to be paid for by what we call the benefiting activity. So if you go to BLM as an individual tribal member and ask for a survey, you're going to be asked for to fill an account for the estimate of the survey before they can start. And so the request also includes any applicable records that you have or the agency has. And the important thing is it needs to include enough information to describe exactly what you want. We've had cases where, because of changes in personnel, a survey was undertaken that and finalized and filed, and it turned out it didn't help the person who requested it because the request was not detailed enough, and they didn't get exactly what they want. They got a whole bunch of other stuff. Looks like we have a few questions here. Per the new memorandum for a fee to trust, an LDR is no longer required. Are tribes still allowed to request them? Yes, they are, and I encourage it. It's good to know that your boundaries are sound. The procedure to do that may vary by region, but just get in touch with your bills and tell them what you're interested in. Chris, do you want to answer this one? Typically, how much does a survey cost?
Yeah.
Give you the hard one.
There is so much that goes into a cost estimate, and that's one of the things that Nicholas would probably be a good topic for another webinar, is what goes, or just getting a survey done, or cost estimate and all the information you need on contracting a surveyor, because the location, how big it is, how much is the research, who's going to do the research. There is so much going in there. You can't really answer that question, but we could give you a lot of information that will help you have a better conversation with your surveyor or BLM on getting that done. So
yeah, I mean, the answer is somewhere between $500 and $5 million. I know that's completely unhelpful, but that is the case. If you are quoted something like $500 for a survey from a private surveyor, I would maybe question how much work they're actually going to do, and it's often a case of you get what you pay for. Because it's hard to answer that, because it could be we could be talking about a half-acre lot in a subdivision that's well monumented, and that'll be relatively cheap, or we could be talking about a messy riparian area where the rivers move back and forth for miles, and we're talking about 600 acres, and that would cost a few orders of magnitude more. But if you're looking for some more specific information, the bills should have a pretty good idea of what the local costs are and what their BLM state office's costs are. So I would go to them.
And why do we charge to survey tribal trust lands? We charge everybody to survey their lands. We don't have a budget to survey. We have a budget to have our staff there. And like Jacob said, we have to charge the beneficiary agency on what we do. So we can't just do it for free, because there would be a whole line to get surveys done when they may not be necessary.
Yeah, that's a good question. If I was king, I would tell Congress to fund a whole bunch of surveyors to survey trust land. But unfortunately, we don't have that. And so the short answer is because we have no way to pay for it. We have no way to pay our surveyors, pay for the equipment without charging, because no one else is providing that money. We have been able to request assistance from BIA, and they have paid for all our cadastral surveys. BIA is good at coming up with money, especially if there's a trespass or something. to pay for the survey. I realize there are costs to doing a survey, but this should be covered as part of the trust responsibility to the tribes. And, that's, my personal opinion is I agree with you, but that's a political question, and that's above my pay grade. Along with the LDR, we complete a COS, chain of surveys, as CFEDs. We are still completing them. The final signature on the LDR COS is the Chief Cadastral Surveyor. We complete them, but at this point, do not send them to BLM for review and signature. This is a change in the process. So if it doesn't have the Chief Cadastral Surveyor signature, it's not an LDR. It's still a good service you're providing. I wouldn't call it an LDR without the chief's signature. And there's nothing in the new policy that prohibits BLM from accepting them. So we should still be accepting them and looking at them. Get in touch with your Chief Cadastral Surveyor and talk about that.
All right, moving on.
Yeah. Okay. So with the request, BLM starts what could be a long process of research. When we get the request and to issue an estimate, we'll first thing we look at is land status. Is this private land, Indian land, BLM land, what's adjoining it? We'll pull all the patents that are relevant. We'll look at all the official survey records to see what we're dealing with, and any additional documents that were submitted. That's why talking to BLM, the more communication with BLM you have, the smoother the process will go.
And that goes to even private surveys. They're going to do the same research. They should do the same research as BLM does. So, and you will find most of this lays true for both private and federal to a point. So, okay, Jake, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Stage 3 I have on here is tribal consultation. If the tribe itself is the customer who requests the survey, this is automatic and isn't really an independent stage. Where this becomes an important as a separate stage is when the tribes didn't request it, or BIE even didn't accept it, and we're surveying for another federal agency that just happens to share a boundary with Indian land. The BLM state office at this point should reach out to the tribes, let them know that the survey is going on, and ask them if they have any concerns or have any information about where the boundary is. As Chris said, consultation for a survey is a little different than consultation that BLM would do on a policy decision. We don't have a lot of leeway. We have to put the boundary where the law says it is, but we do want to hear from you. The tribes and tribal members may have information we're missing, and there may be sensitive areas we need to be aware of, and we need to coordinate with you access to tribal land if we need to enter. And so that's if you have any concerns with that, the first place to go would be their state office chief cadastral surveyor or the bills.
Evidence is a key important there in finding the evidence where the boundary should go, and you could be a key factor in pointing us to that evidence. So,
and Scott has a comment here. A BLM survey is a misnomer. Looks like you're doing a title search as part of the survey. And that's a good point. I don't think it's a misnomer because you can't survey something unless you know what it is. And part of knowing what it is the title search. And I have a slide kind of illustrating the title, the chain of title search. We'll get to that in a minute. So stage 4 is the special instructions are written. this book there's a picture of on the screen is the Manual of Surveying Instructions, and it is the general instructions from the director of BLM through the Washington, the headquarters chief cadastral surveyor, to the state office cadastral surveyors of how they are to complete a survey. But it's very general. The special instructions is when the state office chief cadastral surveyor takes into consideration the specifics of the specific survey and expands on the manual, or sometimes specific circumstances even require, deviating from the manual. But that needs to be described in the special instructions. And without the special instructions, you don't have an official survey. It authorizes the work to be performed and authorizes money to be spent. They're written to the field surveyor, the person who actually goes out in the field to do the work, and the reviewer, the person who does the first review, the first independent review of the field surveyor's work. Then, along with the special instructions, the chief cadastral surveyor has to assign it to a specific field surveyor, and that authorizes charging the labor hours, and it requires any work to be done in conformance with the manual and/or the special instructions. Without the assignment instructions, it's just some random government employee poking around. The assignment instructions are crucial to the chain of creating an official survey. Then, before and during the survey, the real meat of the research begins, and this is what Scott was talking about. We look through all the official survey records that are relevant. We talk to the tribes, if there's any tribal land around. We do thorough research of any relevant local deeds and surveys. Usually that requires, some urban counties will have all that information online. You can do it from your desk, but in rural counties where we're more often working, it requires actually going into the county courthouse or some kind of equivalent county office. We check with other federal agencies because they have records that relate to where monuments were and where boundaries are. BIA, of course, is the first place to go for tribal land, but other agencies have relevant information. USGS, Bureau of Rec, National Park Service, even small, even Fish and Wildlife. And then BLM keeps their working files for all the surveys they've done within a certain time frame, and so any survey that's been done nearby, we might have some relevant information in those files. The other thing we look at is title surveys, title policies. We don't rely on them, but they're a good place to start. If title companies have their title plants and can easily generate a whole bunch of records for a parcel, and they're often not complete, but they point us in the right direction, give us a good place to start. We talk to local surveyors who've worked in the area. A lot of them have records that have not been recorded that are just in their office, that are a gold mine for establishing where that boundary could be. And then local residents and land users. If there's a missing monument and the neighbor remembers where that monument was because he tripped over it when he was 10, that's useful information, and could lead to a different location for the monument. And of course, there's all kinds of other sources we look at too. It looks like a comment here. Have they considered incorporating survey services into LTRO? This may be a DOI question, but the cost is limited to individual landowners who consider this aspect a part of trust responsibilities. So, because of the delegation of authority in the statute that I showed you first, BLM has the survey authority. So integrating a BLM into LTRO would be a difficult process. Do you have any comments on that, Chris?
I think you covered that really good. And yeah, back to Scott's comment. I've seen things go wrong. We had an instance with BLM and the county. Some guy owned a little chunk of property and he wanted the bigger property across the road, and he hired the surveyor and had the surveyor do it. Surveyor did it, recorded the county went and added it to the GIS. No one ever did title research. I think BLM and the tribes, or the BLM or the tribe, owned the larger piece of property. County put it in their tax rolls. 10 years later, it got sold off for not paying the taxes. And some guy bought it and never had title to it. I mean, so there are things that go along, and incorporating that would be a fantastic way of doing that. So sorry to.
Yeah, we got another good comment from Scott. 99% of surveys are licensed surveyors getting the property owner's deed, title policy, and old survey, verifying it's accurate and job is done, all for $500. Not what BLM does. At first glance, it looks to consumer as BLM ripoff. Yeah, Chris, I think, Scott, I would put the number a little lower than 99%, but you're right. There are a lot of surveys out there that don't do anywhere near the amount of research and work that we do, and it's a case of you get what you pay for.
Yeah, and like I said, Nicholas, how to hire a surveyor and the contracting for a surveyor would be a great presentation for another one that the Bills or someone could put on. And very important. Scott, thank you so much for your comments, all of your comments. And we got a little over 15 minutes left, I think, Jacob.
Okay, yeah, so I'll speed it up here to make sure we have some time for some more questions at the end. Yeah, so this goes back to Scott's comment. Part of the research, if we're surveying something that's not public domain, that was private at any time, is a complete chain of title. We can't survey a parcel without knowing what it is. The deed describes it, and the deed is like a barcode. So the words in the deed may not describe what's actually owned. And so, we'll go back to the original patent or the grant, and follow that through every parcel split that affects the boundary, to ensure either that the description hasn't changed or that there are not overlapping claims or gaps that are outside the area of the deed that can actually be claimed through that ownership chain. And these can get really complicated, especially in the eastern seaboard, where we have private title going back to the 18th century. But a research for a survey is not complete until you can describe how the boundaries were created and where they are. Without knowing how they're created, you're on a very shaky basis for marking a boundary on the ground. Let's try to speed up a little bit here. This is the fun part. Is field evidence is collected. The term we often use is following the footsteps of the original surveyor. We take the records of previous surveys and search for evidence on the ground, and keep our eyes open for evidence that's not in the record, like occupation lines and monuments that no one bothered to record. And we search for evidence of landowners' actions, like building fences, and we talk to people on the ground who are familiar with those boundaries. Why is your fence here? The fence may be there because it was the cheapest place to build it to keep their cows in, or it may be there because when they built it, they knew where the corner monuments were and built a straight line between them. This picture here is a stone, an original stone from a 19th century GLO survey that I found in the middle of a road in Oklahoma. 3 private surveyors have been through there previously and not bothered to dig for it. It's about 4 feet down in the road. And all 3 of them set rebar for corners in 3 different places. And all 3 of them, in this case, encroached onto Indian land. So actually doing the work to dig for where this stone that was placed in 1883, I think it was, helped save some, tribal land. That's another thing. Often surveyors who are under pressure to make a quick buck will skip. I've heard, I've done some work in places like Oklahoma where half of the local surveyors say they never bother to dig for a monument because there are just none left out there. And they just plop their corners down at intersections of roads. And that they may get by with that when they're not dealing with federal land, but when they're surveying federal land or private land that bounds federal land, the fact that it's too hard to dig up a monument will not move Indian interest. Yeah, I like that, Scott. The Bible condemns moving ancient landmarks.
Yeah. Okay. So Jacob, we do have a question. Yeah, some of the tribes can work with BIA to get funding for if they have boundary issues or other things. And, LSRs or LDRs and COSs require a 50-year chain of title. All chain of titles are not created equal. It's tough to get good research done anymore, even in the past. And we use the chain of titles as a starting point to do that and continue with our research and having to go back to the original patents. And most of the federal patents should be on GLO. If not, you can reach out to your Bills or Jacob and I, and we can put you in contact with Eastern states who can help you find the original patents. So, but most of them are updated and they're constantly adding more to that every day. So,
yeah, Stephen, your comment about 50-year chain of title, it depends. It's not a requirement for most few to trust processes, but it can be, depending on the situation. Like he said, if you only go back 50 years, you could miss something. And so, the LDRs are a risk assessment, and there are times when a Bills will make a decision that, that the risk is so low that we don't need to go back longer than, in this case, 50 years. You very, very rarely would find an actual official survey that does that, though. Is there a way to speed up the release of the completed cadastral survey to the tribes, or a way for the tribe to actually track the status of the survey? We finally got a survey that was completed in 2016. It shouldn't take 6 years. No, you're right. It shouldn't take 6 years to get a survey. Yeah, if you're having trouble getting a copy of a survey and don't know what the status of a survey on your land is, get in touch with the Bills right away and ask. It should be released as soon as it's filed, and you should be updated along the way. If there's some kind of breakdown in communication, talk to your Bills or the chief cadastral surveyor in the state, and if you need more help, come to us at headquarters, and we can see if there's an issue that we can help with.
Jacob, we got 10 minutes left.
Okay.
A few questions, but let's get through some more slides.
Yep. Okay. So besides the physical, the human caused changes that we're looking for when we're collecting evidence, we're also on the lookout for natural changes. Where that's a huge issue is with water body changes. Erosion, accretion, avulsion, reliction are all changes to water bodies that can affect the boundary, and they take a skilled eye to find often, and they have incredibly significant impacts on the boundaries. Other things are landslips and slides, and then there's weathering and aging of the man-made evidence. If we find a record that calls for a rebar that was set 50 years ago, and when we come to it, it's nice and shiny, that's a good sign it's not the original corner and something's up. So when the field surveyor is out in the field and searching for evidence, they have to weigh conflicting evidence, statutes, and case law, and all this skill and knowledge and decision making is often called the art of land surveying. Land surveying isn't a science. We use measurement science in our job, but it's often referred to as an art. Stage 5C is monumenting the corners. We need to create new footsteps and create permanent memorials to the decisions made. And these monuments create boundary stability. If everyone can see the monuments or know where they are, and they can be found 100 years from now, and they're still in good shape, everyone knows where the boundary is, and there's not really much basis to have conflicting views. Our standard monuments are 30 inches by 2.5 inch flange steel pipe with 3.25 inch bronze caps, and they're often put inside piles of stone. So that's another added expense over a private survey that BLM may have. Private surveyors can do something like just pound a nail in and call it a corner, or 1/2 inch rebars are common, or even just mark an X in concrete. And that those stick around a lot less longer than our official monuments. Stage 5D is the draft of the plat and the field notes. The record identifies and describes the lines and corners of the survey and the procedures by which they were established or reestablished. The field notes describe the evidence found and the new evidence established. They provide the explanation and justification for the decisions made to locate the lines and corners. The field notes and the plat together need to describe completely what we found and why we made the decisions we made. Because likely when there's a conflict, we're going to be long gone, and our record needs to speak for us. And with that record, unless, as I said before, the surveyors out there did something fraudulent or a gross error, not just a little mistake. If we explain ourselves and describe what we did correctly, our survey will stand any test. So once the field surveyor's finished, it goes to review. Just gonna try to hurry along here. Most BLM state offices have delegated reviewers whose only job it is to review the work of others. They're usually much more experienced and have worked many years in the field and have moved up. And it's their job to make sure that everything was transferred from the field to the record accurately, and to make sure that the decisions made were defendable in court or against another survey, and to make sure the record's complete. And then it goes to the chief cadastral surveyor. And this is a third review. The chief cadastral surveyor, should be the most experienced and most knowledgeable survey in the state office. And he or she will look at the work that the field surveyor did and the reviewer reviewed, and make sure that they agree with everything that's been done, and that they think that the official record is sufficient to defend the survey. And then he or she signs the field notes in the survey. acting for the director, who is acting by delegation to the secretary. But the survey is still not official. You still have to do the public notice. And public notice is always done by Federal Register notice. Often also there's local notices published in the newspaper, or concerned individuals are actually, sent a copy of it. And this starts a 30-day protest period. So the public, anyone in this period, can look at the survey and say, wait a second, I don't think the survey is right. And that temporarily stops the process. At this stage, there's no specific interest required. So any member of the public or tribal member can say, I don't think the survey is correct, and they can supply the reasons they don't think it's correct. And the BLM state director, who is in the BLM state office chief industrial surveyors chain of command, will evaluate that protest. And if they think the protest is warranted, changes can be made. And the changes will be made before the survey is filed. If they believe the protest is not warranted, then they will deny the protest, and it still may not be over, because someone with an interest in the survey can appeal that decision to the IBLA, the Interior Board of Land Appeals. They're a semi-judicial body within DOI, and they will look at the survey. And if the protester still does not agree with IBLA's decision, and then it moves on to the federal courts, and we're in for a long haul. If within that 30-day protest period, no one protests, the plat is automatically filed at the end of that period, and then it becomes an official record. Right. So when you see an official survey, it should have this statement that's circled saying it was signed by the state office chief cadastral surveyor for the director, and a stamp that says it was officially filed. Older surveys will vary, but this is what a modern survey should look like when it's official. And then the last stage is, Chris, do you want to take this? This is your area.
So the survey data would be entered into the parcel fabric, and it will be adjusted and put out in the PLS data set for the GIS community to use. And then we will update the SMA on that if the Surface Management Agency is changed. And it's only for informational purposes only. It's not used for doing a survey off of. It's just to help you find the information or locate it in Google Earth or anything like that. It's not an official way to do a survey, but it is for mapping purposes and display purposes of the corners. So, and Jacob, I'm kind of got caught up on most of the questions. I've answered a lot of them to everyone or private messaging. So,
oh, good. Yeah, I was just looking at them. Yeah, can I say you answer? Okay. So BLM, when you ask for a survey, BLM will give an estimate of how long it will take. Things can go wrong, and it can take longer. And some of the reasons that can happen is the records that we need just don't exist, or they're lost in a courthouse fire or something. We can have conflicting records, one deed from one person to one person and another deed from another person to another person. Whenever we get into a boundary conflict or a complicated legal issue, we'll slow things down because we need to cover all our bases and make sure we're making the right decision. We sometimes will go to the solicitor's office for advice. If there's extensive destruction or obliteration of the physical evidence, the monuments, if all the monuments are gone, we're going to have to search for monuments way further out than we originally thought. We can have access issues. Roads can be closed. Private property owners may try to stop us from crossing their property to get to the area. Physical barriers, remoteness, weather, topography can also slow us down. Natural changes, floods and landslides. And then, we're a government agency, hiring slow. Funding is based on, the political winds. So we might not have the resources that we planned to have when we gave that estimate. And I think we're just about out of time. Perfect. Chris, do you have any closing comments?
I think we've covered everything. There was a question about GPS. There is a difference between resource grade and survey grade GPS. And then Andrea Hall had a question. Please reach out to Jacob or I or your Bills to get that one answered. So.
Great. Wow. Thank you very much, Jacob and Christopher, for your very thorough presentation today, and many thanks to our audience members who participated so robustly. I mean, these webinars are so successful and vital because of that interplay between the presenters and the audience. So I'm so grateful that we had such a great conversation today. And Christopher, I definitely, of course, as we're ending the session, somebody wants to cut the grass, definitely today, I wrote down some of the suggestions you made about another webinar in the future as far as preparing for a survey, what's involved in some of that information, because that does seem to be an important take home from some of the conversations that I saw coming through the chat as well. So we'll figure that out. We'll put something together for everybody, and probably later in the summer or early fall, maybe have a conversation like that, moving forward. So again, many thanks to Jacob and Christopher for the participation in today's webinar. And of course, many thanks to the audience for your attendance and participating as well. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Thanks, Nicholas.